Ready to go. I invite the first speaker, Eugenio, to take the field.
My speech is going to start in 3, 2, 1. Hi everyone, my name is Eugenio. I'm here to take on the role as the first proposition speaker when it comes to the motion, which is the use of private cars by a single driver with no passengers should be forbidden in city centers. Here my role is going to be actually to frame the motion and to show our team line and the reason why we actually believe firmly as the proposition, why we believe actually that the use of private cars should be done. But before doing this, what is the status quo? What kind of world we live in and what kind of society we live in? First off, we live in a globalized world, and in the status quo there is the problem of climate crisis. And one of the most factors of climate crisis is indeed the emission produced by cars. And in this motion addresses a fundamental problem that are the amount of cars used in cities. In particular, the cars driven by people that actually do not have anyone in the cars with themselves. So, what are the problems of this status quo? We can actually highlight 3 problems mainly. The first problem that the motion addresses is the emission of CO2. In fact, those people that actually drive the car for themselves actually produce an amount of CO2 that is not only CO2 but also greenhouse gases, produce an amount of CO2 that's not sustainable. Second problem, because the amount of private cars especially in city centers are much more, we have the problem of traffic. Therefore, we have the problem of smoke, and therefore we have the introduction of more greenhouse gases. Therefore, the smog and in the city centers, the health of people is at risk. And we can ask the third problem of the status quo, that is the health of a singular person. Therefore, for the 3 problems.
Does side position know that a car emits equally, regardless of having 1 passenger or 3 passengers?
Yes, that's the point. But as we're going to show you with our model, actually, we are going to incentivize the use of cars for many people. So the use for a single car is going to be useless. Actually, the people are going to reduce the number of cars in circulation. Therefore, addressing the details of our team, we actually firmly believe that the private cars should be actually banned if they are used by a single driver. So what we mean by and how does a private car used by a single person look? A looks like a belonging to or for the use of a singular person, not for public uses. And B looks like a private car looks like a amount of pollution that is useless because it's for a singular person. It could be easily not produced. So, and where are those cars that are in city centers? They are very navigate, and B, they are many smooth. So, therefore, we arrive to our final thesis. We in fact want to actually eliminate the cars that are actually driven by a single person. But how can we arrive at that goal? Actually, this is our model. We in fact want to, in our model, we want that every person who possesses a private car has the certificate that is not alone. How can we do this? Actually, when the car is shopped on or after this thing is promulgated, actually what is going to happen? Every person is going to certificate that or they are alone or they have another passenger with them. Therefore, what is going to happen with our model? Firstly, is it possible? Yes, is it possible because we are facing a crisis and an action needed to be done. And secondly, it is possible because it's feasible. And therefore, is it efficient? Yes, because actually with that, what goal do we arrive to? Actually, we reach the goal of reducing the amount of cars in general present in city centers. Why is that? Because actually, if people will not be incentivized to have a car because he has to do this thing. So how do actually can we eliminate the problem that those people that are going to actually, there will not be possibility to actually circulate in the city center, how can we actually assure them that they can move? In fact, with our model, actually what we do incentivize with the fund of the use of public services. Therefore, with our model, we reach two things. Firstly, we reduce the amount of cars because we do this. We ban the circulation of those cars, and so we use the cars, or the private cars. And we use another thing with the fact that we incentivize the use of public emission. So therefore, we arrive to our thin line. We in fact want to show you why we should ban those cars, and we are going to develop three main points. The first point is going to be that by banning those cars, it will be drastically reduce pollution. This first point is going to be later on developed by me. The second point of our team line is the public transit is going to be benefited from it, from our model. And the third point is the valorization of the city centers. So let's address the first point of our team line. As Sette explained, that actually the need in the city school of an action, because as we showed you, in the city school there exists the problem of firstly the amount of CO2. So the amount of CO2 produced by those cars are not sustainable. Second problem is the traffic. How our model addresses those two problems. Firstly, because we reduce the amount of cars that are circulating. How can we do this? Because people are not going to be incentivized by actually owning a car and actually driving a car in city centers because they could and firstly, because our model incentivizes the use of buses and public transport. So what we actually obtain with our arguments, what I'm showing you, actually we're showing you that that because we should ban actually those private cars because it is needed a change, and it will be benefit not only the global in general because we will reduce drastically the amount of CO2, but also will benefit the people. So the impact will be not only for global, but also for every people that live in the center, because the amount of pollution, the amount of smoke that people are going to breathe is less and less. So what I've showed you with my whole speech, I showed you the problem is real and we have to take an action. I showed you the model, how we as a proposition team intend to do. I showed you our team and I showed you the first argument of our team that has to show you why those cars should be banned, and therefore I address the values of our team that are the future proofing and efficiency when it comes to solving this problem. Therefore I rest my case.
Thank you for your speech. It lasted 8 minutes and 3 seconds. Okay, so please, Veronica, please, when you're ready, take your time. Not much.
Okay, my speech will start in 3, 2, 1. I want to start my speech with the rebuttal of what proposition team has said just now. They have a model and they propose, for example, incentives and, for example, public means of transportation to solve the problem, because they have said that in our world there is a problem, and we agree with you. So there is a problem, too much means of transportation, too much emissions, but sorry, your model doesn't solve the situation, doesn't solve the problem of emissions of greenhouse gases and of toxic waste, of pollution. Because as for incentives, practically is impossible. You can solve the problem mathematically. For example, 4 people in just one car. Mathematically, you can solve the problem, maybe, but practically, how I can put 4 people in a car if we have different things to do, if we have different roads to take during the day, so practical is impossible. If we have travel to do, yes, instead of 4 cars for 4 people, we can take 1 car for 4 people, but we are talking about city centers, so during all day in quotidian life, so it's impossible practically. And as for other incentives like public transportation, yes, it could be a perfect solution, but it's a solution that we also can do. So without forbidden in city centers private cars by single driver, we can introduce more, for example, public means of transportation. So it's a solution, but not only for your team, just as for your team also. And another thing is that more alone people means more means of transportation, so more emissions, and you in this way you don't solve the problem. Instead, as for example, solution, you can talk about declare something when you have to buy or use the car, but you haven't shown our model. And for example, you have talked also about emissions and traffic. So the problem in your world, and we agree with you on this problem, but your solution doesn't solve the problem. In fact, as for emissions, maybe you can reduce in a small part emissions, but you cannot solve the problem in this way. Instead, with our model, I'm gonna talk it later, we can solve the problem. And the second point of your speech was that of traffic. So it's the same thing of emissions. You can reduce traffic a bit, but the problem is the word in this motion of forbidden. In fact, sometimes it's better for the environment, so you can travel 4 people in a car and reduce traffic. But if I have the necessity of travel alone, I can travel alone. So it could be a right thing, a good thing for the planet, for the environment. But if I have the necessity of travel alone, I can, because it's forbidden. In fact, we are talking about cars driven by a single person, and the fact that the use of them in city centers should be forbidden. So I mustn't do this. It's mandatory in any case, in every situation, without any type of regulation. In fact, there will be legal consequences. This is the problem. And the other problem is the word city centers. Not only forbidden, but forbidden in city centers. And why city centers? Because city centers are areas with all the principal, more important services like first aid, supermarkets, shops, and you know that, for example, emergency can happen to everyone. Emergency can happen to everyone and in every moment. And if I'm alone, what should I do? Pay for the fact that I'm only and I can't solve the problem, I can't solve the emergency in that time because I'm alone and I have to pay because there will be legal consequences, because it's mandatory in any case without any type of regulation. So what is the problem? Too much cars in streets, queues, too much cars, more emissions, environmental problem. Environmental problem has global consequences, greenhouse gases, rise of temperatures, but also local consequences, because monuments, for example, of our buildings are damaged by greenhouse gas emissions. Other problem of too much cars in streets could be the fact that ambulance or police in urgent situation, we have to tackle the problem as soon as possible. We need to be fast, and there are too many cars. And why your position can't solve the problem, because in your way, as I just said, maybe we have one car for more people mathematically, but practically it's impossible. And why we can solve the problem? Because we can solve the problem remains because of the thing that I just said before. It's forbidden. I can't travel alone because there will be legal consequences. So our proposal regard introducing LTA, so limited traffic area, and in a lot of cities this is already present, and it's a perfect solution because we can solve the problem of the environment, not for the driver, because as for the driver there will be only negative consequences and a lot of negative consequences. Instead, we can solve the problem of the environment, and this regards specific hours, so it doesn't create any problem for the people. And for workers, for example, or residents in these areas, it can access to streets with LTA, and if there is an emergency, relatives of people have an access, so there are no problem. And our model can reduce problem of pollution without adding other problem like our positions, like your position. And our model can leave the autonomy at single drivers in case of emergency. In fact, our solution regards two arguments. One, it doesn't solve any problem, so forbidding this doesn't solve any problem. And second, it creates unjustified discrimination. I'm going to talk about the first argument. Problems, I have just talked about this, are queues and greenhouse gas emissions. As for queues, so too much traffic, you don't solve the problem. You can solve the problem mathematically, but not practically. Just in theory, you can solve the problem. And even if this theory can possible for your position, instead of hundreds of cars, there will be 800 of cars, and there is a slight reduce of cars. So we cannot resolve the problem. Practically, it's impossible, but also theory. And the second, that you aren't able to solve the problems, because to solve the problem of greenhouse gas emission, we need bigger solution and not just reduce the number of cars in a small number. So, in conclusion, the use of private cars by a single driver with no passengers shouldn't be forbidden in city centers. Thanks.
Thank you for your speech. It lasted 8 minutes, 20 seconds.
So, my speech will start in 3, 2, 1. Tick-tock, the climate crisis is real, and we cannot simply overlook it. We can't sidetrack it. We can't put it in a second plane. Because 6 years, 7 minutes, and 13 days, that's the amount of time that's left on the clock to the end of the world, where irreversible damage will be caused to ourselves, by ourselves, to the earth, because of carbon emissions. And that is something that the proposition team is planning to put a stop to. Good evening, everyone. My name is Simone Savarese, here today to take on the second speech for when it comes to the motion that has been stated beforehand. Now, you will hear a few things from me. These few things include a general restructuring of what has been said by the first speaker, a refutation of what has been said by the opposition team, and the building of the remaining two arguments in our argumentative line. I would like to start with the main rebuilding that we made in our first case, because we firmly believe as the proposition team that a global restructuring of vehicle commerce, as we described inside of our model, would be the most efficient solution to not only free up the streets, but also free up our skies from pollution and damage. Refer back to the clock that I told you guys about, because it is an extremely important part of today's society. We are talking about irreversible damage that will end up destroying our earth as we know and love. This marks the end of the reconstructive part of my speech. I would now like to go against what the opposition has said about the claims we made in our speech, and even then the claims that they made in their speech. I'm happy that both teams agree over the fact that cars emit a lot of gases in the air, and we agree over the overuse of these cars. Because no matter how many people are in those cars, the same amount of CO2 is emitted. But during their speeches, firstly their first speech, they failed to interact with our line because they didn't fundamentally understand what our model consisted of. Because they thought that we said that people couldn't travel alone by themselves, while our model clearly explained how people that have two or more owners, like cars that have two or more certified owners, one that's a principal owner, the second one is a secondary that only testifies that the car is not owned by a singular person, then they can freely travel with any way they want. It's not abolishing people who are alone from traveling, it's abolishing people who are alone. It's generally not letting people who don't have a family or are not carrying anyone on their backs pollute our air even more. Because even then, they cited emergency services. We're talking about ambulances, and in no way, shape, or form can these ambulances be less effective than simply transporting a person to a hospital, because they're doing it quicker, they're doing it in a more controlled manner, there's experts there on the spot, and it's generally a more controlled environment. Right?
Does the proposition know that if there is even a case in which a single driver can drive alone with no passengers, you're going against the motion and against your burden?
A single, we clearly stated in our model how our interpretation of the motion looks like, because we believe that single households can, like a singular person, cannot own a car and drive it by themselves if they're not carrying anyone on their backs. But if they are with someone else, not necessarily in the car, but the car is co-owned by someone else, then and only then can they travel freely whenever they want, wherever they want, inside of a city center, because this is limited to a city center. Now, another contradiction, a slight contradiction that I noticed from the opposition team is that they said the amount of cars would increase on the streets, when in fact we are selling less cars by promoting our model. So I don't really know how that goes. But anyways, that ends the confutation part of my speech. I would now like to go on with the arguments that we have defined. The first one states that public transit would be inherently benefited from our model, because this public transit is, in general, a crucial part of any urban environment. No urban environment can prosper without the use of public transport. And that is exactly what's going to be funded, because it's more green, it's a cleaner alternative, and as I said before, we cannot overlook the climate crisis. Although 6 years might look like a lot, to apply any kind of reform takes years upon years, and we need to act now. This is the quickest and most efficient way to change the status quo as we know it. Some evidence to back this up would be the states of Amsterdam, Berlin, and Vienna, because all three of them adopted this motion perfectly by not necessarily stopping single people from getting vehicles, but they have shown us how less people using vehicles can be a greener option, simply better, and equally as convenient as using a normal vehicle. Take, for example, the streets of Vienna. They're completely empty. Most of the times, they're completely empty. There's a very, very few cars. And the time that there's cars, it's not to an extent of today's city centers, which is something that we cannot overlook. Now, as a second point of our line, we say that we valorize and clean up the city centers. Because simply imagine a city center without a singular car, where people are walking freely, both on the sidewalk and on the street, happy to be where they are, observing the environment around them. Because we believe that this could be a genuine movement for when it comes to cars and their market. The funds gained from from more tourism, which comes itself from cleaner streets, could then be used to revolutionize entire infrastructures. These infrastructures could be trains, buses, etc., which would completely change the way that people move inside of these nations. And we believe that if we even start to take these baby steps towards a better world, we can eventually solve the problem of vehicle air pollution. Because with our model, we predict a huge 20% decrease in emissions by cars, which is exactly what we intend to promote. And if what I just stated is a world that the jury wants to live in, I beg you all to vote for the proposition team. Thank you all for listening to my speech, and vote proposition.
Thank you for your speech. It lasted 6 minutes, 50 seconds. Luca, when you're ready, okay, tell me when to start.
Just a moment.
Yes.
Okay. My speech is going to start in 3, 2, 1. Hello everyone, I am Luca Ponchondolfo, the second speaker of the opposition team, and now I would like to introduce you how I am going to divide my speech. So firstly, I would like to do the rebuttal speech, obviously, of what the first speaker and the second speaker of the proposition team just said, and then I would like to start with my own argumentation, which is that this creates unjustified discrimination, dividing that in other 2 points, the useless point and the dangerous point. So, I'm going to start my rebuttal speech by saying a very important thing, that is the proposition team is going against their burden. And the fact that they are going to say that they say if one person co-owns a car with another person, they can drive it even alone, goes against the motion. Now I'm going to start with the rebuttal speech by saying that the first speaker started by saying that we have the problem of the emission produced by the amount of cars, especially in city centers. So we all know the problems that we are going to face, for example, the house gases, the greenhouse gases, the smog, the health of the people, and so many others. But the way we are going to resolve them is way better than the way that the proposition team is actually doing. And that it's how the first speaker has just explained, and how I'm going to explain in my second argumentation. Then the other point of the rebuttal speech is that they are going to incentivize the use of the public means of transport. But it's a little bit contradictory, because if you're going to obliging people to not drive alone, we are obliging them to be dependent, for example, to means of transport. That means that the demand to them will be increased, and so more and more means of transport will be used, and that isn't going to solve actually the problem of the health of people, and so the greenhouse gases in the city centers. And then the last thing that the first speaker of the proposition team didn't actually explain is about the fact that they are going to certificate, as I rebutted before, that the person who's going to drive the car, for example, or the means of transport in general, is going to certificate that it's going to be alone, that it isn't going to be alone, and actually it's going to have a passenger. But the first speaker didn't actually explain neither how and who is going to receive this type of certificate. Now I would like to go on with my argumentation, which is about, I repeat, the fact that it creates unjustified discrimination. And I divide that in the first point, that is, it's about the useless case and the dangerous case. So starting with the useless case, just imagine a normal person in the nowadays life. a person that maybe is single and has to do normal things of everyday life. For example, going to the groceries, going to the bank, going to work. It's a very important thing. So this kind of person is going to be completely no thanks. I'll check them later. As I was saying, this person is going to be completely dependent from other people, for example, the passenger, as I was saying, or in the other cases, for example, the means of transport. This person actually can't do anything without becoming illegal, substantially. It means that these people automatically are going to lose their autonomy. Practically, this means that if I don't have, for example, a partner in life, I don't have a colleague whom I go to work with, or I don't have a mate to hang out with, I become completely, no thanks, I become completely dependent and I lose completely my autonomy. So, in the first scenario, I depend completely from public means of transport, for example, to their hours, their stops, clearly without control of my life. If one day I, for example, want to go to work and I lose the bus, that means that it becomes practically illegal to reach my my work, because I have to take the car alone and I can't do that without having the passenger. No thanks. And I have to receive the passenger and I have to receive the passage from another my colleague that. As I said, is a little bit contradictory, because he's going to let me to work, but to take me, he has to take the car alone, becoming illegal. Or think, for example, to another case in which maybe I want to reach the stop, to reach the city center, and it's a lot far from my home. I have to walk meters, kilometers by foot and not by car to reach the bus stop. So I'll take the PIs if you want.
Yes, are you aware of the fact that the co-owner could also be a parent, which I assume most people have?
Yes, but as I said, you're going against the burden of the motion, because if you talk about a co-owner of the car, you're saying that a person can drive lonely the car, and that is going to go against the motion. So I'll go on with the second point of my argumentation, which is about the dangers. So imagine the case of emergency, for example, even if there were a few cars, it doesn't mean that quacks aren't going to create, and doesn't mean that this type of quacks aren't going to pollute to the environment, because as I said in my rebuttal, if the demand for the public means of transport increases, so does the pollution of the environment. And in this case, by introducing the model of the LAT as the first speaker of the opposition team, my team, just said, we are going to reduce completely in certain times and certain areas of the city the concentration of the cars. So you're going with your model to reduce the number of cars, for example, from 1,000 to 900, and we're going to reduce the number of cars in the city from 1,000 to 0 in that specific time and specific areas. And that is going to resolve completely in another way and a better way the problem. Thanks to our model, I, as an individual, I don't need to depend from anyone or anything, and that's why we're proud to oppose. Thanks.
Thank you for your speech. So 7 minutes and 30 seconds. I invite Francesco to give a speech as the first speaker. Tell me.
I'll start in 3, 2, 1. So we fundamentally agree, there is a problem that we have to solve. There is a climate crisis and we have to change. We have to make a change for the better, for the development of our environment, which in this case wasn't provided by the opposition team. We weren't given even remotely how we could ever solve this problem without applying this motion. Good evening everyone, I'm Francesco Miele from the Caccioppoli in Naples, here today to take on the role of the third speaker for the proposition team for a motion that states in this case that we should prioritize in this case banning these types of usage of cars. Now, the first thing they portray is an example of what problem could cause the fact that 4 people in a car could signify that you could use it while being all alone, you couldn't. Well, that is just false, as my second speaker, Simone Savarese, showed in our model that we can change this prospect. We are talking about a different thing. A co-owner isn't equal to a passenger. That is a big point that we have to affirm. Another thing is that our model is impossible and is impractical. We could never apply it. While in some cities it was already used. Not as we're talking about in motion, but in Amsterdam, Vienna, Stockholm, and many cities, it was already applied and had many benefits, not only on the public health, but on the overall development of the city center. Another thing they said is that, and which we agree on, is that they want to introduce more public transportation. As we said, we want to make an investment. This investment won't only last now, and it is for the future. It will be an investment so big that no one could go ahead and deny and make it useless. That is our big part of the motion. We want to make a change not only for us, but for the future inhabitants of our cities. Now, they said the problem is global, and we agree, everyone can have this problem. And at this point, we have to apply a new type of motion. We have to apply a new type of policy which wasn't applied before. We want to make a difference. We are the one for the efficiency of, in this case, this system, and for the sustainability in the future of this case. Another thing which is truly important is that in city centers, there are just too many cars. We have to solve it. And in this case, we are not banning them, but we are just in ban and usage that is just useless. It wouldn't have so much effect as they portray in emergency cases or in many other types of things. This is a little problem that will be simply resolved by more incentives that we portray now in our economic policies. The problem, they said, is solved just in theory. So they said we need a bigger solution, where that is just completely false. It crumbles upon itself, because our solution is new, and in this case, we are not banning completely the usage of cars. As they mentioned the ATL and the POI. We don't want to make something that risky that could really at this point damage the population of the city center. We want to make a new change that will not only incentivize the economic part of our city, the public transport, and even the environment will get benefits from this type of motion. Another thing we have to talk about is how they said we are contradictory. We are going against our motions. But as with my first speaker and the second speaker showed, and as I already said, we want to pronounce again, co-owner isn't equal to passenger in our motion. That will be impractical to just ban everyone using a car alone. Imagine even someone as they said. Yeah, go ahead.
That scientific position acknowledge that the motion states that there is no possibility of a single car with single person inside of it.
Well, in this case, we specify how this single person will be in the car. The single passenger, in this case, wouldn't just be by a person being in the car. It's a new type of statement. If we want to apply a policy, we can't just make up the solution, okay, there has to be no one in the car and just the driver. It is just a completely made up thing that we didn't portray with our motion. Another thing that everyone has accepted and that we want to solve is the smoke problem. There is so much pollution in our town and we have to make a difference. In this case, they said that people will be too dependent, in this case, on public transport and couldn't have individual freedom. So what they're saying is that they prioritize personal freedom rather than a collective development, not only of our cities, but of our entire community. Not only us will get benefits, but everyone living not only in the city center, but even nearby. This will be a big change for the better, not only for the local, but this local will become global at some point. Everyone could apply this motion, and this will make the difference not only for ourselves, but for the entire world. Now I go ahead with the reconstructive part of my speech by telling you that what was portrayed by the opposition is just an obscure view of our motion. We don't just want to ban everything, we want to make an investment. We know this is gonna be hard, but in this case it is an investment for the future. We want to prioritize in this case public transport because, as we already stated many times, it is more efficient, and as a thing that the opposition said, by prioritizing public transport, we will create another problem with pollution, which is just completely false. Because in cities, cars make up at least the 80% of vehicles in the entire public area, which is at this point just makes their entire argumentation false. We are the ones for the efficiency and sustainability. I don't know how many times I can say this. We want to portray a better future, not only for ourselves, but for the others, while they fail to provide you with any examples on how really our real solution will be bad, how it couldn't be applicable, how there are problems. What they portray is just a general view, an obscure view you will get by just looking at the motion. While we dived in the particular, we portrayed you with examples of Amsterdam, Vienna, Stockholm, many cities we have started to make this change for the future, for the 2050, for new things. We don't have just to stay here and just pretend that there isn't a problem. We have to make up a new world. We have to show how everyone can really live a sustainable life. The problem of what they portrayed and the others are just useless at this point. They are even contradictory to their cause. We are portraying a future where everyone can get what they want, and in this case, everyone can live happily. That is not a problem that would really be drastic at this point. We are just portraying a new view of the world. We are not just diving in and looking at the motion by just saying what we saw. We are showing you how we can make a change for the future. How in this case, the emergency is real, the crisis is here, and we have the solution to solve it. We provided you with the answers you wanted, and for this, I ask you to vote for the proposition team. And with that, I rest my case.
Thank you for your speech. It lasted 7 minutes and 32 seconds. So I invite Luca Vitoma to give your speech.
Is everyone ready? So, my speech will start in 3, 2, 1. Now, fine. Imagine there is a group of people who are bullying a guy. Then the teacher comes and says, oh, those who have a B in their name should stop bullying. This is what proposition is trying to propose, because they don't really solve the problem, as they think that big problems created by many actors would be solved just by removing 1% of the cars, so the ones driven by single persons. In fact, they talk about 20% reduction. That is a number that first comes out of nowhere, and secondly, is actually far, far less, as it is limited, as these cars are limited, and just regard single drivers. But on the roads, we do have, for example, cars with 2, 3, 4, 5 passengers. We have buses, we have taxi, we have trams, we have motorcycles, and the metropolitan. So we do have a lot more vehicles, and just by removing, for example, those cars with a single person, we're not resolving climate change, we're not reducing and completely erasing emissions. So don't buy their analysis. Now, 3 things in my speech. Firstly, some reframing and clarification on their model. Secondly, 3 main points of rebuttal, and for each, I reveal our team line and a conclusion. Firstly, panel, be a note and pay attention. They say that if one person co-owns a car with another person, they can drive it even alone. But this goes against their burden and against the motion. Why? Because it is mandatory. There is no car with 2 passengers or more, as this is what they have to prove, regardless of co-owners. If, for example, I own a car and my wife is co-owner of that car, I cannot go with my wife in the city center. I must go alone. So they are proposing a model that is illegitimate because they're not respecting their burden. So here, in this case, their model doesn't stand, and they're not fulfilling their purpose. But now, I'll imagine that they didn't even provide us with that model, because otherwise they would have already lost the debate. Now, let me move on to another important point of reframing, because they say that this is a necessary measure to solve the problems. But we need to remind side proposition that first, this doesn't solve the problem, as we've explained our arguments, and I'll prove more during rebuttals. This creates an illogical discrimination. In fact, if I am single, I'm alone, or I'm simply going for a ride, or most importantly, for example, going to the city center to reach a service, that I cannot do that. City centers do have banks, public offices, the postal office, first aid, even hospitals. Like we do have a polyclinic in Bari, and I wouldn't be able to reach it alone on their side of the house. So it is illegitimate to deprive these people to access these services and live free. Now, let me move on to my first and most important point of rebuttal, which is about the environment. In fact, what is proposition's claim on that? That single drivers contribute to emissions, and this is the reason why we should eliminate them from the city centers. Well, propositions fails to recognize that one car with 1 passenger emits almost the exact amount of greenhouse gases emitted by 1 car with 3 passengers, because the car is the same. On the contrary, maybe they're polluting even more, as there is even the weight of the other 2 people that contributes to the weight. So there is the need of more energy to drive the car, and so there is even a little bit of more fuel needed to move the car. Why doesn't proposition step not make sense? Let me provide you with an example. If I have to go to the bank, and another now has to go to the bakeries, and another stranger, I don't know, wants to go to the postal office, why on earth would we go together if we are different people with different destinations? We don't know each other. It doesn't make sense at all that we should drive with the same exact car. First, so this is impractical and nonsensical. And what does side proposition tell us on that? Oh, but between the same family, the same friends, yes, we can do it. But first, this is already what is happening. In fact, for example, if my mother has to go, for example, to the supermarket, and they have to go to the city center as well, we should go already in the same car, and we don't take 2 different cars. Moreover, on your side, I cannot, because if I leave her, for example, to the supermarket, then I would out of nowhere become illegal, as I've left her to the supermarket. I have to go to the postal office, but I am alone, so I am going against their model, against what they have to prove. And so I cannot, because it is mandatory that there should be no single car with a single passenger. So it doesn't make sense even on this. So on your side, we don't have an approval on emissions. Maybe they pollute even more, as I already said, and it is even less practical. Another point also on rebuttal is that even if you say that, oh, but a car driving 4 people to 4 destinations pollutes less than 4 cars driving 1 people. Well, first, this is not true. As 1 car driving 4 kilometers pollutes as much as 4 cars driving 1 kilometer. I'm not saying that. It's simply what physics tell us. In fact, to cover a distance, we need energy to cover that distance with with a certain weight. So 1 car for 4 people, 1 car for 4 kilometers pollutes as much as 4 cars for 1 kilometer each. So simply physics tells us that the situation, that the amount of fuel that would be used and the greenhouse gas emissions would be the same. But even if this was not the case, it is impractical, as if I have to go to the supermarket and a stranger again has to go to the bank, there's no practical reason why we should travel together. So what are the impacts of proposition on the environment? They made a lecture on the bad consequences of climate change, both locally and globally, but they don't assess their benefits, as removing just a little part of the problem doesn't make any solution, because we have the same emissions. So don't be fueled by the emotional phrases on how climate change is negative. Now, before moving on to my 2 little points of rebuttal, let's take a beer if you're saying.
No, I have no idea.
Okay. So now I'll move on to our so on comparative, lastly, on the environment. They tell us, oh, but for example, 80 cars would be better than having 100 cars in the city centers. But we improve the situation even more, because firstly, we have a substantial reduction of emission, and secondly, for example, we have better impacts for our health, as gases are dangerous for health, and people walking in the streets are negatively impacted by this. But thanks to our model, so the LTA, during the core hours, like for example, from 12 to 14 or from 17 to 19, there will be no cars at that time, and this would be beneficial for the health of people walking. Now, rapidly on the last 2 points of rebuttal, the second on incentives given, because they say that they would provide incentives, for example, to public transportation. But this, firstly, goes against the autonomy and comfort, because if I have to go to the bank, it is way more comfortable to go with my own car. But when it comes even more dangerous, when it comes to emergencies, like if my mom is feeling bad, on proposition side, I would have to wait to the bus, and then reaching its home, walking on our side of the house, I can simply drive my car, even if I'm alone, and get up to work. Lastly, on the revitalization of city center, I will spend less time on this, as simply because proposition removes up to 50% of the cars at their best, while we do revitalize areas, as in the core hours, there's no car. So we do revitalize the city centers. Our people can walk freely and enjoy the city centers without having other cars disrupting them. So in conclusion, we've proven that on their model, it wouldn't be beneficial on the environment, while on ours it does. The incentives given doesn't change the situation, do not prove their point, and are symmetrical, because we can have public transportation as well. And thirdly, we do revitalize better the city center. This is why you should stand with side opposition.
Thank you for your speech. It lasted 8 minutes, 33 seconds. So we are over with constructive interventions, and we are at the replies. So the first to give the reply will be the opposition with Veronica. Veronica, wait a minute. 3 seconds, if possible. So Veronica, please, when you're ready.
My speech will start in 3, 2, 1. I want to start my speech by saying that the other team have gone against the burden as if it is obliged. In fact, the motion says the use of private cars by a single driver with no passengers. So single drive with no passengers, no single owner. Driver and owner are different things. In fact, we intend a single driver, so a single person. In these motions, in this topic, in this debate, a car with two people doesn't exist. We intend, the motion intend, a car with one person in a car, a single driver, not a single owner. And it says, the motion says it. They talked about a lot of incentives. So the model is wrong. But even if it is good, it is right, they have talked about incentives. We also have incentives. So it isn't a solution only for your position. We can also do this thing, but it's useless because, for example, public transportation, taxis have not only costs, but also it isn't comfortable. It isn't a good solution to solve the problem, to reduce the problem for the environment, for the pollution. It isn't a solution. So you don't have a solution, instead we have a solution. Because of the incentives, and we already talked about it, but also promoting riding in group. We have promoted riding in group, but we have already shown that practically this is impossible. Instead, our model, LTA, is a good solution, is a solution. In fact, we can reduce the impact, we can reduce greenhouse gas emissions, because in precisely hours, cars don't ride at all in streets. So we can solve the problem. Instead, their model cannot, because they can reduce the number of cars from 1,000 to 1,800, 1,700, but it isn't a solution. And not only it isn't a solution, it has also negative consequences. A lot of negative consequences, like lack of autonomy, impossibility to access a service, because we're talking about city centers, so important service, and legal consequences if there is the necessity to drive alone. We have done already this example. I'm in emergency situation. What should I do? I have to take the fact that I'm only, because we should forbidden in city centers a single driver. It's impossible and it doesn't have sense. They have talked about environment, about traffic, but problems aren't solved, aren't reduced, are only made worse in their position. In fact, they can solve a small part of the problem by adding other problems and other negative impacts on drivers, on situations. So problem isn't solved, and we can reduce the problem and impact. In fact, in their world, people lost their autonomy to move in their city center only because they're only. So unjustified discrimination by using buses and respect their hours or taxes and their cost. Only in situation where they're only. Instead, in our world, we can reduce the problem of pollution without adding other problems, and we can leave the autonomy and single drivers in emergency situation, because residents, workers, relatives can access to streets. Thanks.
So, your reply lasted 4 minutes and 7 seconds. Okay. Good. So, the last intervention will be the pro team reply. Please, Simone.
My speech will start in 3, 2, 1. We believe that the opposition is like a cat trying to bite its own tail, counterproductive and self-harming. Good evening, everyone. My name is Simone, here today to take on the reply speech when it comes to the motion that has been stated beforehand. Now, as a reply speaker, it is my job to carry out a few things during this last part of this debate, the first one of which is giving out the points of clash that were mentioned inside this debate. One of the main points of clash that we noticed is car autonomy and in general model and motion interpretation. In the beginning of our speeches, we decided to identify some key terms such as driver as the main owner of the car and the driver as the main owner of the car. But the main thing that they decided to press on in their speeches was that car usage would be dependent by a singular person, which wouldn't be by another person, which wouldn't be compliant with our model. As we clearly stated, compliant with our definition of the motion and our definition of the terms that were declared during the motion, we decided to identify a car owner. We decided to identify that cars have to have two separate car owners. So we say that car usage is not dependent, which is exactly why we win this point of clash. Now, a second point of clash that they mentioned inside, that we had inside this debate is pollution and in general car reduction. They decided in their speech that they were going to be able to reduce car pollution and in general the car usage in these cities by 100%, which is not only unrealistic, it's also unfeasible and goes against what they themselves are saying. Because they've stated multiple times that cars would be an incentive, would be useful, would aid people in being autonomous and moving from point A to point B. But in their speeches, they decided to state that they would reduce car usage to zero in cities, which is simply counterproductive. And the third and last clash that we identified inside of this debate is efficiency versus applicability. We believe that our model is 100% applicable, counter to what the opposition says, and it's simply more efficient because of the fact that it's simple to actuate, because the people that are involved and that already have bought a car, they just have to go to a car shop and get another person and test it to them so they can freely drive their own vehicle. Again, this person could be a parent, this person could be a friend, this person could be your wife, your spouse, your everything. As long as they are guaranteed to be a possible passenger on that car, they are liable to be a member of this agreement. This is exactly why because in their speeches they claim that cars will be reduced to zero, which is impractical and simply untrue. And even then, what they're promoting, not caring about that contradiction, it's polluting the environment and destroying the ecosystems around the city, which would manage to extend, these pollution would extend outside the borders of the city and damage ecosystems even outside of it. The outcomes in their world are disastrous, and this is exactly what we do not want in our real world. But however, if we prove a viable solution, prioritizing the usage of public vehicles and public transit instead of using private vehicles with extremely high pollution rates, exactly why we fixed that 20% goal limit that we were going to use, that the opposition misinterpreted as a guaranteed number, but it is nothing but a goal. But I believe that at the end of this debate, you should be able to choose between two worlds, where our world is simply the world of sustainability, the world of future-proofing, while they are rejecting any kind of future-proofing when it comes to this motion, and instead are fighting to either set car usage to zero or do not change anything at all. And a change is urgent because there is a climate disaster going on in the whole entire world, which we need to fix as urgently and as quickly as possible. Thank you all for listening to this debate. I rest my case.
Thank you for your speech. It lasted 4 minutes. So, the debate is over. Thank you, because you have spent a lot of brain energy on that. Okay, then, an applause.